What on earth got you interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
Okay, so what's Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is...
What's Bitcoin?
Inflation-resistant money.
Bitcoin is the strongest asset the human race has ever invented.
We live in a world of laws. Not just laws that are written by men to govern other men, but we're dealing with laws that were here before we ever got here. I'm talking about natural laws, what some people would call first principles. Laws that either naturally or in a way that's not physical, you know that if you break those laws, you're going to suffer consequences that you would rather avoid. We're going to talk about how Bitcoin affects how we deal with those first principles with our guest. I'm Nate Martin, and this is the Bitcoin Effect. If you're looking for the best way to learn about Bitcoin explained in plain English, then join the thousands who have signed up for the free 7-day Bitcoin crash course on 99bitcoins.com. You'll receive an email with a video each day that will explain the concepts and step-by-step guides to starting your Bitcoin journey, beginning with the most popular video about Bitcoin on YouTube, What is Bitcoin?, with over 4 million views to date. Just go to 99bitcoins.com, type in your email address, and that's it. Your first video will be in your inbox as soon as you log in. Register for free today at 99bitcoins.com. Would you like to earn sats back on the purchases you were going to make anyway? With the Fold app and Fold Rewards debit card, you can. With popular retailers, restaurants, and online merchants like Amazon, Old Navy, and Under Armour, with some offering up to 17% back in Bitcoin, what better way to stack sats than with Fold? Use the link in the description and you can earn $25 just for signing up for the Fold Spin Plus debit card today on foldapp.com or find the Fold app on the App Store or Google Play. Dollar cost averaging is a simple and profitable way to begin investing in Bitcoin, and Swan Bitcoin is the easiest place to begin. Choose the amount you want to invest and whether you want that to be a daily, weekly, or monthly recurring investment. You can also buy Bitcoin instantly from your bank account with the click of a button, even as a contribution to your tax-deferred IRA. Go to swanbitcoin.com/NateM to earn $10 in Bitcoin when you sign up. That's swanbitcoin.com/NateM to start stacking sats today. On the podcast today is SurferJim, and that's the only thing I know how to call you. So, is there?
That's it.
That's it? That's perfect. Hey, the last...
Jim is fine. That's why I chose to put my real name in my Twitter handle so people don't have to call me some unusual pseudonym.
Well, Jim, I appreciate that. The first time I bumped into you was watching BitBlockBoom. That's the first time I really kind of recognized, who you are and what your bent is, really. And I wanted to get you onto the podcast and I wanted to give you, I wanted to take away something that BitBlockBoom gave to you. I'm going to take away the time limit. You and I can talk as long as we want, as long as we want to, because I know that the talk on first principles that you gave to open up BitBlockBoom, it was extremely important to you. You were really passionate about it, and you got to the point where you just plain ran out of time. And so
I did, unfortunately.
And so
that was my first public speaking engagement ever. And my very first time using, what did I use here? What's this?
You said
program?
PowerPoint or something like that.
Right. You see, I don't even remember what the hell the program is. I'm not a tech guy. I'm trying to play catch up in my later years, learning about all the stuff computer related that these kids are like whizzes at. So when Gary asked me to speak, I had the subject already because I had started writing about it, but I had to turn it into a talk. And I just thought I could say all that I need to say much faster. And I was way wrong. Funny story though. Gary came up to me later in the day and said, I learned an important lesson, which is never have your first speaker be somebody who's never given a talk before. Because I was up there completely clueless. There was a timer I could have been looking at the whole time, but I was just so focused on my slides that I just never even looked at the timer. And apparently the guy holding the timer was supposed to like wave at me and tell me to hurry up, and he forgot.
Either that or you
cruising along.
Would you have even
fine.
seen him had he been waving his arms at that point?
I suppose he probably could have got my attention, but he didn't try. He failed at his job. But it was really more me, just not being more of a speaker with more experience. I just don't. I have to, if I'm going to ever make another talk, I need to practice it more. And I did practice it, but I practiced it in my head,
Mhm.
sitting, looking at my computer and just talking to myself instead of out loud with a timer. So, you live and learn. I've talked to a few other speakers who were kind enough to give me somewhat harsh but fair, criticism. And because most of the time they've been there, they've made some of the same mistakes, so they totally get it. And they're nice, they're my friends, and so they're just trying to help me, and I appreciate it. If I'm going to speak again, I hope it'll be better.
Well,
So we'll see.
I would almost chalk it up to your being a tinkerer. Well, now you're tinkering with public
Yeah.
speaking. You've pretty much taken it apart, and now you're trying to learn how to put it back together and figure out how it works. And I loved how you actually open that talk that
sorry.
way. No, I love
That's me. My whole life is like, if I'm going to do something, I can't just do it because someone says, do this and use X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to be like, well, why X, Y, and Z? Why not A, B, and C? Like, I just want to know why I'm supposed to do anything I'm supposed to do, or how something works, or how do I get from A to B. I want to know the mechanisms and the pathway and stuff, because I just feel more comfortable if I know all the parts that are working around me, whatever it might be, whether it's, my work, or something like Bitcoin when I first had to learn it, or even this, like learning how to speak in front of people. Oddly enough, I really wasn't nervous about being in front of the people. If I had any apprehension, it was whether I was going to get my talk done in time, and I clearly failed, which that part sucks, because right at the end, I don't know if it's noticeable, but I was very flustered, because I knew there were certain things in the last few slides that I thought were critical to say. And honestly, I have no idea if I even said them. I said what I could think to say. I was trying to skip slides and read fast and pick out important concepts. And I'm going to have to go back and listen, and then watch my own slides and see what, if anything, that was really critical to my point, did I actually end up leaving out.
You were so careful about laying the foundation, and you did it brick by brick, and you scraped away the mortar as best that you could. And unfortunately, it didn't leave you time to build the frame and the roof.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on, because I think that there's so many things that you wanted to say that were so important that I would love to just kind of have that conversation with you about, so that you can expand on that without the time constraints. So kind of start actually from the beginning. How you were a tinkerer, and how you actually came upon why you wanted to talk about first principles, and why it's important that we recognize those and Bitcoin, and how you kind of put them in tandem together.
Well, so my whole point was to show how I wanted to give the impression in people's minds that Bitcoin is now something that is similar to first principles, that we no longer have any real control over, that it affects us regardless of our knowledge of it or our attitude towards it, which is what first principles do. Mm-hmm. And so I started that talk off by saying, one of the most obvious first principles on this planet is gravity. That is, you don't have to know about gravity. It's still going to act on you. And even if you know about it, your attitude towards it is irrelevant. It's still going to act on you.
Right.
So that being such an obvious first principle, I started to think of, how can I go from natural first principles to what I use the term for money as a construct. That is, we invented the idea of something that we could use for this thing, this construct of money, mm-hmm. right? So money is not a natural thing on the earth, but the idea of money is, I want to say, in some ways, it's DNA encoded into us as humans. And what I mean by that is that, and like, if you go back and look at that talk I gave, I went from obvious physical first principles to physical things that aren't as obvious as first principles. But when you poll a large enough group of people, you'll find that certain things resonate in certain ways that cause them to become a type of truth. Without going through every slide and every step along the way, there are things out there in the world, like sound is a perfect example. So it's a physical thing, right? Sound is physical. There's vibrations that come through the air that hit our eardrums, and it's a physical thing. And one of the things that helped me to bridge the gap from physical to more subjective is the idea that although sound is a physical thing, we subjectively hear it and decide if it sounds good or not. And I was watching some show on TV years ago where slow motion photography was showing a guitar string vibrating X amount of times per second at a certain note. And then if you just go up one octave, it vibrates exactly twice as fast, and go down one octave exactly half as fast. And so there's an absolute mathematics to sound. It's very precise in that sense.
Oh, you're talking to a musician,
so
so you're speaking my language right now. You're in my lane, so yeah, I know
Okay,
exactly what you're
so
talking about.
you get it,
Mhm.
right? So you get, all right. So, but you can take different sounds and combine them, and they can sound like crap. There are certain vibrations of sounds that, when mixed together, are considered dissonant. They're just not appealing to us. So does that change their physical nature? No, they're still sound waves. But why don't we like them? Well, we're coded a certain way. We are coded to like the vibrations of certain sounds together and not like others that are together. But it's not universal. All right. So the worst sounding music, somebody still made it because they liked it or something, or maybe they didn't. But the point is that there's always going to be somebody at each end of any scale you want to create to measure something. There will be people that will, let's put it this way, going back to sound, if you put the right combinations of notes together, more people than not will like it, even though some won't, right? But there'll be outliers, and you can end up with what we call a bell curve of a distribution of results. Of in this case, you're going to do a poll, you're going to play some notes, you're going to say, does that sound good? People are going to say either yes or no, or rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. I like it a lot, or I don't like. And you're going to be able to end up with a bell curve of results that represent the average, or the dispersion of reactions to those notes, right? And what you'll find is if they're generally pleasing to some people, they'll be generally pleasing to most people, and most people will fall right within the middle of that bell curve. And that's how you get a big peak in any bell curve, right? This is all statistics. So without getting into explaining statistics, bell curve is a representation of a set of data that has a dispersion from a mean average, the mean average being the bulk of what people agree to. So in this case, you're going to find sound, music notes that are put together that are consonant, which is the opposite of dissonant, right? So generally people like them, or they seem to work well together. You'll get a majority of people say, yeah, it sounds okay. And then as soon as you throw a couple dissonant notes together, you're going to get a majority of people say, no, that sounds like crap. Even though somebody will go, no, I like it. It's all right. Okay, so you do that enough. And although the music is absolutely physical, the hearing of that music, or the perception of that music, is totally subjective by us humans. But if you poll enough people, you can find a point which most people either agree or disagree, and in the agreement is where I consider a type of truth. That is, two notes plucked together that most people like is something humans like. You can say almost categorically, these are good, right? So that's a type of truth. It's not the same type of truth as gravity, but it's damn close. And we as humans, we measure everything this way. I mean, like I used an example of a chemical experiment. So again, this is physical, right? You can mix two chemicals together and you can measure something, whatever it is you're trying to measure, the speed at which they expand, or the speed at which they heat up or cool down. It doesn't really matter. You pick a metric and then you measure it. But the granularity with which you can measure anything on this planet is limited. So if you're mixing two chemicals, no matter how closely you weigh them or measure them, chances are there's not the exact same amount of molecules in each batch of the two chemicals. And yet when you mix them together, if you measure and mix and run your experiment as identical as possible, one after the other, you will get an average that, like, where you could predict, when we measure 1 gram, we take 1 gram samples of these two chemicals, we're always going to get this result. When we say always, it's within a range. It's within a standard deviation on that bell curve. And so all throughout history, scientists and engineers have ran tests hundreds, if not thousands of times on all kinds of things to find out where the limits are or where the averages are, so that we can make a prediction in the future. So in my industry in building, if somebody says to me, I can use X size steel beam across this opening and it will handle all the weight of the structure above, I'm trusting that some engineers years ago bent or broke a whole bunch of steel beams to find out what their breaking point actually is, so that other people can depend on that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not out testing steel beams,
No.
right? But there's ratings for this stuff because some people actually did that work. And there's everything on this planet is based on this kind of exercise by someone, hopefully truthfully, right?
Right.
So
Well, that's
when it
basically
comes to
that's basically the scientific method. Innovation is done through
yeah,
experimentation and failure, until finally you've actually have something happen that is positive, and it might not actually be the thing that you intended it to happen. I mean,
correct.
You take a look at Post-it
Yeah,
notes. That was a mistake. They just experimented
yeah,
with that adhesive, and they just said, "Oh, this is actually useful."
yeah, right. So, like WD-40 is another one.
Right.
WD stands for water disbursement or dispersion. So some people were trying to mix chemicals to make some type of a lubricant or whatever they were trying to make. And they realized that these couple chemicals are really good for, loosening rusty bolts and stuff. So it became a product by accident. But tests were done and conclusions were drawn from those tests and averages were figured out. And it got to a point where you could count on it. You can know that if you do these two things together, you're always going to get this result, let's say. And so when you go from the physical stuff like gravity or sound or even imagery, in my talk, I talked a lot about imagery because I've been a photographer since I'm a teenager. And there are images that appeal to people universally, and they can't even tell you why. They just look at it and they see either the right arrangement of elements, the framing of the photo, the right density of color or the
Right.
combinations of colors. It doesn't really matter what it is, but you can show 1,000 people a bunch of pictures and you'll get a range of who likes them and for what reason. And you could start to figure out elements in pictures that are sort of universal. And again, I want to go back to like our DNA. We as humans are coded a certain way, even though we may not really recognize it. So like, why do most people gravitate towards certain imagery, even though they've never seen it before? You show certain pictures to one group of people, and then show that same picture to a completely different group of people across the planet, and you'll get similar results. Why is that? They don't even know each other, and it might be a picture that has nothing to do with either group, but there's something in the picture that draws people towards it. And it could just be, like I said, the arrangement, the framing of the subject. It doesn't really much matter what it is, but there are things that if you do enough tests, you can come to the understanding that there are elements in photographs that cause us to react positively, and other elements, if combined the wrong way, will cause us to go, no, that's an ugly picture and I don't want it on my wall.
Yeah, there's a mysterious agreement as to what beauty is, whether that be in music, whether that be in art or photography, as you made mention of.
Yep.
I've gone to a couple of car shows here this last summer, and what is it that makes a beautiful car? Listen, I can't explain it. I don't even know how a car works. I'm actually going to have to drive over to you so that you can actually fix it, because I'm not that guy. But I do know when I see something that is beautiful. And like you said, there's a mysterious agreement amongst people across cultures that people go, that is a pleasing photo, or that is a pleasing piece of music.
Right. And I think it's more or less DNA coded into all humans with variability. Obviously, we're not all the same. But I just think, and I can't make this connection with facts, but I think it has to do with our survival. Honestly, I think that we were made to survive by being able to tune into certain sounds, being able to see certain things. And I take it as far as even taste. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a chef, and she essentially agreed with me that there are certain combinations of foods or spices that when put together are more universally liked than not.
Mhm.
And some that you try to mix together and almost everybody hates them because they're just not meant to go together. I can't even give you good examples. I'm not a chef. My palate is one of the worst out there. If my friend is listening right now, she's cracking up because she knows I have a very limited palate. There's a lot of food out there that most people like that I just don't like. But I still think that on whole, as humans, we have certain DNA programmed into all of us that's similar or very close to the same, so that we will gravitate towards the things that help us survive. Going back millions of years, it probably was more important than say now. Music is a very it's not like we need music to survive specifically, but we do need to be able to recognize sound at certain levels, whether it's in a survival mode or in the case of music, just to enjoy it. And so I just think that there are these universal first principles all around us that, you can, as I said, you can study certain ones that are very obvious. Others are a little more subjective. But when you poll enough people, I believe you end up with a type of truth that you could say, for the most part, this is the way it works. Or for the most part, people like this thing this way more often than not. And so if you take all that logical thinking towards this concept or this this idea of a thing called money, right? So money is not a natural object on the earth. Man had to come up with the idea of money and then talk to his fellow man and say, hey, I thought of this thing called, we're going to call it money, right? I don't know what the original humans called it, but the idea is that, in order to barter, in order to trade things, barter doesn't always work. We all know in the Bitcoin community, we all know that one of the reasons money came into existence is because people were trying to solve a problem. They couldn't barter for all the things they wanted because, the person who had what they wanted didn't want what you had. So the idea that we could use a tool in the middle, which is, I didn't come up with the term, but money is what's known as the most saleable good. And in my talk, I mentioned that the idea is that with money, you can buy anything, but with anything, you can buy money. Assuming money is just another thing, it's the one thing you can use anything to buy this money with, right? So, a cup of water, somebody might give you this thing called money. But if you had some money, you could also buy the cup of water. But you can't necessarily trade somebody a lot of cups of water for a new car. Because not everybody wants that many cups of water, right? So you got to have this thing in the middle that you can use to represent value, right? That's what money is. So it's a construct. It's not a real thing. It's not real at all, really. It's in our heads, but it works because it allows us to do something fundamental to our nature, which is to trade and prosper.
When you
right?
said that, when you talked about money being a construct, I'm going to go back in your talk a little bit further because you talked about the fact that you're a tinkerer and you have, you and your brother were both given a toolbox, and you went your separate ways as to how you chose to use them. But that toolbox, the plumb and level, okay, those reveal that first principle, which is gravity. And that helps you to tap into that. And you call it a first principle. I call it a natural law. And we'll get into that discussion hopefully a little bit later. But for now, we'll just call it semantics. There's a natural law, which is gravity. And it's like you said, it's something that is there that you can't control, and it doesn't care what your attitude about it is. So why not just tap into that natural law using the plumb and level and using the tools that we know how to use, like the 3, 4, 5 triangle, to make sure that we know we have a 90-degree angle. Let's tap into that natural law with the tools that we can create, so that we can create something of beauty that's going to last a long period of time. That's how I would see gravity as a natural law. Now, the natural laws that I wanted to get into, and you talked about this with Bitcoin, is what tools can we use to affect a natural law, which I'll reveal here in a second. And you called these first principles. I saw them more as tools, and let me kind of go down that list of things that we talked about. Because when I first emailed you, I said there's some things I wanted to wrestle with you with, because I think that there are some, there's some things that that we can clarify between you and me, and hopefully with our listeners, that this is why Bitcoin is so crucial to the next step in human society. Because you said not only is Bitcoin going to be the world's currency, but it's also going to affect goods, meaning behaviors, of people to the benefit of everybody. And those things which you called first principles were, I'm trying to find it in my notes, there it is, honesty, integrity, loyalty, trust, and trustworthiness. Now, here's where I wanted to wrestle with you just a little bit, because you called these first principles, but the thing is, though, is that we can control them. We can at least control them in ourselves. And people do care about your attitude toward their honesty, and their honesty can change. Their trustworthiness can change. Their loyalty can change. So I would dare say that they are more tools toward a first principle or a natural law, which I think is synergy. Because I think that synergy is something. You take one horse to haul 1 ton of, a 1 ton sled. It's going to take an amount of work. You take the 2 horses and hook it up to the same sled, and it's not going to take half as much time, and it's not going to take half as much work. That's what synergy is. And I think that when you're talking about honesty, integrity, loyalty, trust, and trustworthiness, I think that those things are tools that we use to affect synergy so that we as humans can work together to affect a better good than if we were to try to work on our own. Would you agree with that, or push back on that if you need to?
No, I can't argue with that. That these things lead to a type of synergy. That's why they're there. That's why, as humans, we need to work with them as opposed to against them. And that's how I see them as a first principle. You can't work against gravity and succeed. You can't work against honesty for very long and really succeed.
You can't work without honesty for very long. Yeah.
Well, you can't work against honesty is, I guess, how I would say it.
Okay.
Like, if you're not using honesty in your interactions with other human beings, you can get away with that for a little while, but in the long run, you can't. And so those were, so, you brought that up. I literally forgot all the things that were in my talk. I tried to go from the very physical, which was gravity, through things that were less physical and subjective to things that were literally not physical at all, like these ideas that you just brought up, to something like money, which again is essentially starts out as something completely not physical. It's a construct. We decided, hey, this could work, but what are we going to use as the tool for money? Then it became physical, but it's the concept that is the first principle underlying all this. That is the idea that you can't fight this stuff, right? That it's DNA programmed into us. So in order to get through this life, you got to find trust and integrity and honesty and loyalty. Otherwise, you're just going to struggle. And if you don't give it to other people, they're not going to give you back their best efforts or their loyalty. So this is one of these things. Again, we discovered it as humans. We didn't put it here. We didn't make it. We didn't invent it. We uncovered it as a natural element of our humanity, that it's programmed into us to need and want this stuff and to work with it, not against it, if we want to succeed and we want to get places in life, right? It's a little easier to work if you're honest than if you're dishonest, because when you're dishonest, you got to remember all your lies, and it just doesn't work in the long run. Anybody who's reasonably honest, who's lived a halfway decent life, understands this stuff. It's pretty basic. So my thought in the talk was to prove that Bitcoin was inevitable because it aligns with these type of natural things that humans absolutely have to work with if they want to succeed. So if you want to work with money, the thing that's going to help you is to have a really good money, right? One that isn't going to break, one that isn't manipulatable by other people. And so we've been screwed by, the governments of the world and the central bankers of the world for decades, if not centuries now, because some small group of people has been able to control this thing called money that humans absolutely need if we want to prosper, right? You can point to all of human prosperity, not all of it, but most of human prosperity is as a result of having money to work with for thousands of years now. Because we've been able to move away from barter, people can specialize in one thing only and still get everything else they want, because they could sell that one thing to enough different buyers and take the thing called money in the middle and then just go buy the things they need. Right? It's a simple concept. We all do it every day, but understanding its history and its place in our humanity is the part I was trying to get to here, is that the idea is Bitcoin is inevitable because it's the best money we've ever seen on this planet. And we need money as people. And there's not a person on this planet that doesn't want to have a better life next year, in my opinion. I mean, unless you're ready to check out, and some people do that every day, unfortunately. But for the most part, people want tomorrow to be better, next year to be better. And if you want that, and if you think you're going to get that, you're going to need some money to help make that happen. You're going to have to go out and work, save some money, and then go put it into the things that make your life better. It's very subjective, but the thing called money is not really anymore. It's an absolute necessity for humanity.
That's an important distinction that you just made, though, is that you go out and do the work and you save your money. And effectively what you're saying is do the work and then save the value of your work. We call it money, okay?
Yeah. And money is a representation of our time and our labor.
Yes.
And if you can save it, you can put that labor in now and say, okay, I'm going to store that labor up. I'm going to go give my value to somebody, and they're going to give me something that allows me to just hold on to that, the labor I just gave them, the representation of that labor in the form of this thing called money, which we hope has value now and into the future. And some money holds its value good and some money doesn't. This is where we've been screwed by these governments and central bankers. They're literally stealing it's like I go out and build a house for somebody and I earn, let's say, 100 grand in profit after a year. And the central bankers print twice as much money, and I just made 50 grand in profit. My purchasing power of all that labor just got cut in half because somebody else inflated the monetary base. It's just such evil theft of human labor by a small group of people. It's really disgusting. Everybody in Bitcoin knows this stuff, and that's why having a single monetary unit that can't be inflated, the entire Bitcoin network, humanity can prosper because no single group of people or individual can screw with that. And again, going back to this as a natural, I can't help thinking it's a first principle because it became one. Like money in and of itself it's not just here on the earth like gravity or a 3-4-5 triangle that we discovered, right? The principles of a 3-4-5 triangle are there. We have nothing to do with it, right? It's just take 3 units in one direction, 4 in another, and connect them with a length that represents 5 of the same size units, and you got a 3-4-5 triangle with a 90-degree inside corner. That's geometry that we didn't get to invent. We just uncovered it. It's here on the planet. But money is something we actually invented. And then we had to figure out how best to make it work, which we did in many ways, but some people figured out how to cheat, right? And so now Satoshi Nakamoto gave us the best form of money ever, which gets rid of all the cheating, essentially, and allows humanity to prosper in ways that it never could before. Honestly, I think the next century is going to be the most prosperous in all of human history, because those people that are around for the next 100 years are going to have a money to work with that can't be screwed over by a small group of people. So as a first principle, this money, this Bitcoin, to me, is just the inevitable path that money needed to take. Like as humans, we came to understand this thing called money. We started using it in various forms. Lots of people prospered because of it. And yet it's been broken for many, many years because every form we were able to put money in was somehow manipulatable by some small group of people to their advantage and the detriment of everybody else. So the concept of money has been refined and been worked on ever since it was brought up, until a bunch of computer guys figured out how to use the digital realm to make the most perfect money ever. So we needed, this couldn't have been invented 100 years ago. We didn't have computers. We didn't have the digital realm to work with. So it's a natural progression in our humanity that it came to this, and that's why it's inevitable. Humans were always going to come to this. We were going to fight forever until we could get this thing, this uncorruptible money. Some people out there were always struggling for this. Just the average person wasn't, because they didn't even know. They didn't know the concepts of money. They didn't know the history of money. They didn't know they could affect the realm of money. But
And now
some
that-
really smart
And now that
computer
we have this,
guys.
now that we have
Yeah,
this
they did.
incorruptible money, words are hard. I speak for a living. So now that we have this incorruptible money, there are a number of things or effects that you say that you can prove are going to occur because of that incorruptible money. And before we go into that, I want to ask you, is it okay if we continue this conversation for another episode, so that we can work this out next week, and we can talk about how Bitcoin actually affects those behaviors and those goods that you talked about before? Can we do that?
Yeah, of course. I understand you keep your shows to about a half hour. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So we're going to finish this one, and we'll record a second one. Hopefully we can fit it all in the next half hour, because I can give you like 10 more episodes if you really want.
Great, Jim. Then what we'll do is we'll continue the discussion for next week, and I'll look forward to hearing
All right.
what you have to say about that.